Once upon a time in our student years, my acquaintance with Sarah began against the backdrop of the casual atmosphere of university corridors. She was an energetic and ideas-filled economics student, while I, engrossed in my future profession as a dentist, felt at home interacting with patients and immersing myself in the world of teeth and smiles. Our initial meetings were coincidental, but each of them brought us closer together. Sarah was intelligent, talented, and ambitious, qualities I always admired in her. Her drive for success and determination were contagious, and it seemed that's what drew me to her. I can't say that from our first encounter, I knew it would be a love that lasts a lifetime, but she captivated me with her fire, and we quickly became inseparable. After graduating from university, our life was full of plans and dreams. I delved into my profession, undergoing internships and training, while Sarah rapidly progressed in the product management field. We grew together, supporting each other on the path to success. When we were 27, we decided to get married. Our marriage seemed unbreakable, and our understanding of each other was so profound that I never doubted it. However, over time, some changes began to manifest. Life became more stressful. I had my own clients, and Sarah was immersed in her work at Amazon. We saw each other less frequently, and our shared moments became mundane. I often found myself staying in the clinic, completely engrossed in work, while she frequently went on business meetings and trips. Our conversations became superficial, and a distance emerged between us that I couldn't comprehend. Every morning, as I saw Sarah bustling about, getting ready for work at Amazon, I noticed that something had changed in our routine. She started responding to messages immediately, glued to her phone, and sometimes retreated to another room to take phone calls, not wanting me to overhear her conversations. Initially, I didn't pay much attention to it, but over time, it began to bother me. Our conversations became shorter. I felt that she was hiding something from me, but I decided not to push. Life continued its course. I immersed myself in work, and she in her affairs at the company. We avoided serious talks, especially since she always dove into work whenever I tried to bring up the subject, and I became more and more worried. One day, I accidentally found her phone on the kitchen table. It was her new iPhone that she had praised a few weeks ago. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but something pushed me to glance at the screen. There were notifications from a person named Mike. There was nothing explicitly wrong in the texts, but this constant messaging raised my suspicion. I tried to recall if Sarah had ever mentioned Mike, but nothing came to mind. With each passing day, my anxiety grew. I didn't want to accuse her of anything, but my suspicions were escalating. I decided to talk to her about it, but our communication became even more restricted. When I brought up the subject, she dismissed it, saying it was just a colleague and that I was worrying unnecessarily. But my concern only increased, and I began to wonder what was happening behind my back. My suspicions intensified, and I decided to monitor her behavior. Observations revealed new aspects. She often went on business trips, sometimes unexpectedly staying late at work. At some point, I noticed that she had changed her passwords on devices, something she hadn't done before. This situation became frightening and simultaneously devastating for me. I loved Sarah, and the idea of her betrayal seemed unbelievable. I even began to doubt myself, questioning whether I had done something wrong for her to take such a step. Attempts to talk to her ended in vain. She claimed I was exaggerating, but for me it was evident that something had changed in our relationship. I felt that we became strangers to each other, and my anxiety turned into unbearable pain. One day, I decided to do something I had never done before: check the history of her messages on her phone. It was a violation of her privacy, but I was so desperate that I saw no other way out. In the message history, I discovered a conversation with Mike, a colleague from her company. Their conversations were friendly, but some messages hinted at suspicious undertones that I couldn't ignore. It was a blow to me, and I was shaken. That week was exhausting for me. I tried to understand what was happening, how long it had been going on, all while in a state of shock and deception. I couldn't believe that someone else could be in my wife's life, especially among her colleagues. Every time Sarah came back from work, I felt the oppressive sense of deceit. I couldn't communicate with her normally. The fear of what I had learned hindered me from being in her presence. But I wasn't ready to immediately reveal what I knew. Part of me hoped it was just a misunderstanding or something temporary. But as time passed, it became more apparent that something serious was happening behind my back. Finally, mustering the willpower, I invited her for a serious conversation. I expressed my concerns, nervously awaiting her reaction. Initially, she denied anything serious, saying it was just friendship and that I was being paranoid. However, when I mentioned their frequent after-work meetings and business trips, she changed the subject and began discussing my suspicion and lack of trust. All of this only reinforced my fears and confirmed that my suspicions were valid. I understood that I now had two choices: either continue hiding what I knew and pretend that nothing was happening, or start seeking answers, even if it meant diving into a painful truth. I plunged into a turbulent internal conflict. One part of me wanted to believe in Sarah, wanted to trust her, and hoped I was wrong. The other part told me that it was wrong to ignore obvious signs, and that I needed to get to the bottom of this situation once and for all. I began to monitor her movements, leaving and returning from work at different times. Sarah's behavior remained unchanged. She still left for work early in the morning and sometimes stayed for a few extra hours. I felt the need to make a decision, but I was paralyzed by the fear of losing what seemed to be the foundation of my life. I started avoiding household conversations, trying to immerse myself in work or engage in something else to avoid thinking about what was happening. But every time I returned to the thought of what was going on, I was overwhelmed by sorrow and desperation. It was like a rupture in my soul, to discover the truth or continue ignoring everything and try to live a normal life. One day, returning home from work earlier than usual, I found Sarah in a room encrypting her phone. Our gazes met and panic flickered in her eyes. That moment made me realize that I couldn't continue pretending that nothing was happening. I felt that for my own well-being and to preserve my self-respect, I needed to uncover the truth, even if it was devastating. The decision was made. I understood that I could no longer play this game of secrecy and suppression. The situation was unbearable, and I decided to initiate a conversation with her, this time not backing down. As we sat down to talk, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I began recounting my observations, how I felt that something had changed in our relationship, how I noticed she started treating her phone and her work differently. Sarah initially denied, saying I was overly anxious, that my perception was on the edge, and that it was just a misunderstanding between us. She claimed that everything was fine at her job, that no one else interfered with our marriage, but my observations were too obvious for me to simply take her word for it. Finally, I decided to tell her about what I found on her phone. I knew it was a breach of her privacy, but I couldn't remain silent any longer. She froze, seemingly stunned by my words. Confusion and fear were evident in her eyes. She confessed that there were indeed connections between her and Mike, but she insisted it was just a friendship. She explained that recently they had been communicating frequently because of work, and she didn't want to bother me with these details. But for me, it was too much to accept as just friendships. It wounded my soul and undermined the foundation of our marriage. Her words hurt and discouraged me. I couldn't believe that what seemed like clear betrayal to me, she portrayed as mere friendship. She apologized, saying she didn't want to harm me, that she just didn't want to worry me. My feelings were a mix of anger and disappointment. I felt deceived and vulnerable, and it was challenging to conceal. I asked her how long this had been going on, and honestly, I found it difficult to believe that it was merely friendship. She apologized and begged for forgiveness, stating she never intended to cause me pain. I felt a blend of anger and sadness, but at the same time was grateful that she admitted her mistake. At that moment, I realized that both of us needed time to process what had happened. I suggested that we both take some time to reflect on our feelings and decisions so that we could meet later when we were both ready and able to discuss the next steps. After that conversation, our days passed in silence and tension. We both understood that our relationship was at a crossroads, and neither of us knew how to move forward. It was one of the most challenging periods in our life together. Over the next few weeks, our relationship was filled with indescribable tension. We avoided deep conversations. Our interactions were superficial, resembling more formalities than communication between spouses. I continued to oscillate between feelings of anger, hurt, and the desire to understand what had happened. Occasionally, I found myself contemplating whether it was possible to restore what seemed irreparably broken due to betrayal. At the same time, the fear of what might happen next kept me from making any decisions. On her part, Sarah also appeared disappointed and distressed. We were both in a situation where we didn't know how to return to what was before. Our marriage was on the brink, and we both realized that something had to change. One day, when we both managed to calm down a bit, I suggested that we try to discuss what had happened again. I felt that we needed to figure out if there was still a chance for us to go back to what we had or if our relationship had truly come to an end. This conversation was calmer than the previous one. We openly discussed our feelings, concerns, and doubts. We acknowledged that we couldn't go back to the way things were, but we didn't want to completely give up either. We both realized that we needed to rebuild our relationship and find a new way to be together. It was the first step toward our healing. After this conversation, we started looking for ways to restore our connection. Both of us actively put effort into building new, more open relationships. The first step was returning to therapy. We both understood that we needed help to navigate our feelings and rebuild our connection. The therapist assisted us in focusing on our individual needs and how they could be better met in our relationship. We also started paying more attention to each other. This involved honest conversations, understanding, acceptance, and supporting each other. We actively worked on rebuilding trust, which required time and patience. We decided to reconsider our routine and find more time for communication. This included spending weekends together, taking regular walks, and creating moments when we could just be alone and discuss what was happening in our lives. With each passing day, we gradually began to feel that our relationship was becoming stronger. Forgiving and forgetting was challenging, but we both decided to give ourselves and each other a chance for a fresh start. It was an understanding that it was important for both of us to preserve not only our marriage, but also our individual selves. The story of betrayal was a tough trial for both of us, but ultimately it pushed us to a new level of understanding, strength, and empathy for each other. We both learned to appreciate and cherish our happiness, offering support and love despite all the difficulties. As we deepened our connection, we both realized that the past was not just a trial, but also an opportunity for our growth. We learned to listen to each other better, to be more open and honest. This allowed us to reassess our priorities and strengthen our bond. Sarah and I managed to rebuild trust and respect for each other. We became more attentive to the feelings and needs of our partner. Our marriage became not just a place where we lived together, but also a platform for mutual growth and support. Betrayal was a challenging test, but in the end, it helped us redefine our relationship, making it stronger and deeper. We found the strength for forgiveness and understanding, allowing us to move forward together, discovering new harmony and joy in our lives. 3 years of our marriage felt like a fairy tale. Jessica and I met as students, experiencing all the joys and challenges together. Her kindness, patience, and beauty gave me confidence in tomorrow. We had a little daughter, and our family seemed complete. However, as often happens, the routine of everyday life began to take its toll on our relationship. My days on the construction site were filled with work responsibilities, while her shifts at the cafe extended into the evening. We rarely saw each other, and our conversations became superficial. She claimed everything was fine, but I felt that something was changing. One day, returning home after a challenging workday, I found a note from Jessica in the house. She mentioned going to her friends for a few days to take a break. At that moment, I felt a sense of relief. Finally, she could enjoy a break from the everyday worries. But as days turned into weeks and Jessica did not return, my concerns grew. I began to inquire with her friends and colleagues, and that's when I first heard the name Nick, a young guy from her workplace, reportedly a frequent guest in our family. Left with our 1-year-old daughter, I decided to investigate the situation. My search led me to an abandoned apartment where I found them in each other's arms. This moment was a shock to me, and I could not believe my own eyes. In a conversation with Jessica, she admitted to starting a relationship with Nick. She claimed our relationship had lost its spark, and she was seeking something new and exciting. I was shattered, imagining our family happiness crumbling under the impact of betrayal. Caught in a whirlwind of emotions, I faced the difficulty of making decisions. On one side was our 1-year-old daughter, for whom I was willing to do anything. On the other side was betrayal and the loss of trust. I didn't know what to do. With Jessica, we started therapy, but each session felt like a canvas where pain and disappointment were painted. She apologized, but her words seemed empty. I began to question the meaning of continuing this marriage, wondering if we could ever restore what was lost. During therapy, we were advised to revisit the roots of our relationship to a time when love was strong and trust was unwavering. Together, we reminisced about those moments when we were each other's entire world. These memories became a guide in the dark labyrinth of our tumultuous reality. Gradually, step by step, we began to heal our wounds. It took a long time for me to accept what had happened and open up to new possibilities. Jessica sincerely apologized, and her actions proved that she was ready to regain my trust. Our marriage changed, but it didn't disappear. We both realized that we might not be the same as before the betrayal, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. We learned to communicate better, forgive, and build our relationship on a stronger foundation. Now, looking into the eyes of our little daughter, I believe we have a chance to create a healthy and happy family for her. We both learned lessons from the betrayal and embarked on a new chapter in our lives, ready for whatever it may bring.